This tutorial is going to briefly cover conduits and what they are and how they're used. So going directly off of the transition tutorial where we went from green to red, we're just going to go ahead and swap this out and use a conduit in its place. So we can just go ahead and delete the old transitions, the old event dispatcher, and then make sure that we have tick enabled. Now to switch states, let's say for this one, we actually have to use a variable to do it. So let's add a integer color chooser. Let's also add a initial state. And our goal is this. We want to switch to either green or red based on the value of this chooser, but we also want to be within range of this cube. So for the sake of this example, the cube itself already detects overlap. And say we want to go to green, we can do get context. Actually, we already have our tutorial character set here, so let's do get tutorial character. Get is overlapped. This is already set. It just fires on the on overlapped event. And we want to actually do and let's say the color chooser needs to be equal to 1. So if these conditions are met, it will then switch from here to green. And let's go ahead and just, for the sake of this, give him a default value of 1. Let's play him. If we go up and touch him, he turns green. Okay, now we want to do the same thing again for red. So we could just, drag this down, copy all of this over, or we could use a conduit. And a conduit's gonna be a little bit easier to do. So think of a conduit as a common transition that branches into multiple sub-transitions. So in this case, we would want to have this trigger if we are overlapped. And now this transition is just a color chooser part. So color chooser of 1 goes to green. And let's say 2 goes to red. And now the common transition, how this works is up to you. For this case, we could actually just mark this true if we really wanted to. Or we could take the is overlapped and actually place it in here instead. Actually, let's do that. And then in the conduit itself, we can actually just make this true. So what this means is you're going to start off in here. You have to walk up to the cube, and once you do, this transition becomes true, is overlapped. And then the current behavior means it will actually evaluate this transition, it'll evaluate this conduit, and then it will evaluate the transitions out of the conduit based on their priority order. And if this becomes 1, it will basically say, okay, this entire transition path is valid. Let's go from initial state all the way to green. And if this is false, it will go all the way to red if red's true. And if any of these are false, it will stay in the initial state and it won't even go to the conduit. And the key reason for that is the conduit has eval with transitions behavior. And this is checked on new conduits now when you place them. And this is saying that all this will evaluate as one transition. So this guy, this guy, this guy, or this guy are all one transition path. And the state you're in won't switch unless all of these are true. Now, the old behavior a couple versions ago was if this guy was unchecked, then the conduit is actually its own state. And if it's its own state, then what will happen is, say this transition passes, you'll actually be switched to this state and you'll stay in here until new transitions out evaluate. Or actually until this is true and one of these is true. And I mean, that might be useful in some situations, but overall, having this configured as a transition is generally more useful. And you can actually change that behavior too. If you go under project settings and you go to logic driver, we have conduits, configure new conduits as a transition. And if you uncheck this, that means all new conduits you place will default to states. And again, there's not really a good reason to do that anymore. The current way makes this pretty much in sync with how animation state machine conduits work. So if we play this, and you see it went to green. Now let's go ahead and set the color chooser to 2, and it goes to red. And if we go to Conduit and we uncheck Eval with transitions, in this case, it's actually going to work right away. If we switch this transition out, back to where the conduit needs it to work, what's going to happen is when we press play, it's going to go from the initial state to the conduit and stay there until you're overlapped, and then it will go to one of these two. Yeah, you can see it's actually set in the conduit now, and then goes to red.